Welcome to the latest Q&A. I'm here today by myself without Robin. Robin is picking up our two children at the airport so they could come to our house here and give us coronavirus now that they've been on a plane for the past few hours. So, by the way, is there evidence that airplanes are contributing to a rise in cases? The past few times I've been on a plane, everyone's wearing a mask. They serve limited amounts of food. I have not heard about any uptick in coronavirus cases from stewardesses or pilots or anything like that. So I'm not convinced that riding on a plane will help contribute to the spread of coronavirus. That said, I've gone from New York City to Florida. I went from one epicenter to the other one. Maybe I'm the super spreader for all I know. I have not gotten tested yet, so we'll see. I hope not. There's one thing. There's one thing I want to say though, which is that yes, there's a rise in cases in Florida, in many states. We don't know what's causing the rise. Some people say some states have reopened too early. Some people say that the protests have caused an increase. Let's stop trying to figure things out because nobody actually knows anything. And the evidence is on my podcast, I have interviewed experts in every category. I've interviewed doctors, economists, investors, entrepreneurs. Nobody really knows what's happening. Nobody knew in the beginning how many deaths there would be, how many people would get infected. At first, people thought maybe not a lot would get infected. Now we realize maybe almost everybody right now is infected and asymptomatic, in which case the fatality rate is extremely low. Don't forget, there's 300 million people in this country. There's 7 billion people on the planet. The virus seems to have had at least a first peak, if not a first run. And there are 500,000 deaths worldwide out of 7 billion people. And yes, that is truly horrific. But it's obviously not the end of the world. And I'm not saying this in a blasé way. Being from New York City, I know many people who had the virus. And my cousin right now, this moment in Florida, a few miles away from here, is on a ventilator in a hospital. So it's not as if I don't have personal experience with the virus. And at the same time, we also have to understand that, so just to back off a little bit, what I'm hearing now from various sources is get everything done in July that you need to get done. Get your haircuts, buy clothes, buy food, because by the end of July, if the trend continues the way it is right now, and the end of July is in a short amount of time, it's only in a few weeks, by the end of July, there probably will be more shutdowns, more lockdowns, maybe New York, maybe states like Florida. We don't know. We know there's going to be a lot of pressure to lock down. I'm hearing this from people in Massachusetts, New York, Florida, that there will be lockdowns at the end of July. Again, it's not definite. This is just rumor, so take it for what it is. But, what's upsetting me is that I will honestly say I don't think the lockdowns help. And I'll tell you why. Before the New York lockdown in March, everybody was already social distancing as much as possible. Like I had a lot of meetings in the first week of March or not the first week, but the final few days before the lockdown. I canceled those meetings. I canceled performing, even though, every place was open. People were naturally social distancing. And there's a lot of evidence to suggest if you put the curve of New York City right on top of the curve for Sweden, which had no lockdown, they actually look exactly the same. So it's unclear what any lockdown did. What we do know is that 40 million people were laid off, that trillions of dollars were lost from the economy. We do know that there were many collateral fatalities as people were not able to go to the hospital for cancer appointments, heart attacks, suicide attempts, checkups, whatever. So there was collateral fatalities. We do know that domestic abuse hotlines went up like 8,000% in many cities. So all I would say is, there's nothing we can do about it. They're going to lock down whether we like it or not. It's no longer relevant to waste any time arguing on social media. But the important thing is, how are you taking care of yourself? This month, take care of the things you need to do. Make sure you're physically healthy, because if you're not physically healthy, you're more likely to get this virus. Make sure you're emotionally healthy. And, I know this is boring. You could go to a million other self-help IG lives to hear about this, or podcasts or whatever. But, try to make sure you're locked down with people you like being around. Make sure you're creative. People listening to this, I don't consider us civilians. Okay, the civilians are going to hide under the sheets and they're going to argue on Twitter all day long. And by the way, I'm not saying I'm above that. I've sometimes argued on Twitter every day, all day long, and it's useless and irrelevant. It's not even entertaining, but maybe I get some needs. I wouldn't do it if I didn't get some needs satisfied from that. So if you find yourself doing some behavior that you know is not good, ask yourself, what is this satisfying for me? Like, maybe I feel I'm so afraid of the lockdown and the economic uncertainty and the societal uncertainty that it's sort of like venting that anger, or that, anger is just fear clothed. So maybe I'm venting that fear by being angry to anonymous bots on Twitter by arguing. And I mentioned this yesterday, but Twitter is it's like everybody is recovering from this radiation sickness that we were all exposed to, and we're just spitting blood on Twitter in the form of tweets. And it's just useless, but we do it. I mean, I did it this morning. I saw that the Seattle police were finally going into the Chaz, or as I've been reminded, it's now called the CHOP. I don't even know what the CHOP stands for. So the Chaz was this autonomous zone, and it just once again reminded me of the hypocrisy. Like a week ago, the mayor of Seattle was saying, oh no, this is a peaceful rally. This is like an art festival. Well, in the past week and a half, 6 people were shot, at least. 2 teenagers were killed, okay? And one of them, just 2 days ago, was a 16-year-old African-American teenager. It took CNN 24 hours to report on it, and all they said was a man was shot. They didn't say it was a 16-year-old boy. They didn't say it was an African-American boy. They didn't say, where were the parents of this boy? Why was this boy shot at 3 a.m. in the morning, Monday morning? They didn't say who the killer was, or were police investigating. So there's a lot of, we can all of us now, we can all point to the hypocrisy that we've been seeing. The clear ambivalence of the economic fear that many of us experienced during the lockdown. The clear uncertainty. Everyone acts like they're certain they know everything about this virus, but there's a lot of uncertainty. We do know that the death rate was not as high and will not be as high as was originally predicted. We do know that we successfully flattened the curve for healthcare facilities. So we know that the virus wasn't as bad as initially predicted. We also know that there's great economic trouble when there's lockdown, so hopefully people figure that out in positions of power before we enter this lockdown again, which is probably going to happen again for those arriving now. It's probably going to be another lockdown from what I hear, starting at the end of July or early August. So whatever you need to get done, get it done. And what I will recommend is now start thinking, this is a good time to start thinking about a reset. There's going to be a grand reset in society. We don't know what that reset is going to look like yet. Like here are some trends that are happening. And we've talked about all the original trends, move to remote, acceleration of various trends like automation, blah, blah, blah. That's all been talked about. But there's other trends we're seeing right now. So for instance, there's a movement away from large cities to small cities. So just in the past week, I have screenshotted on Facebook 30 different of my friends who felt the need to announce on Facebook, well, the time has come after 5 years of living in New York City. My bags are packed and I'm moving. Almost everyone I know, I was just on a phone call meeting this morning, and both people live in New York City that I was on the phone call with, and I said, where are you guys? And one person said, I'm in, the Berkshires in Massachusetts, and the other person said, I'm at Martha's Vineyard. So nobody I know has stayed in New York City. Now, unfortunately, the essential workers have stayed in New York City, and I feel bad for them that the only people working during a lockdown are the people who are probably the most susceptible to getting any virus or illness. And I found it kind of hypocritical in New York City. Every day at 7 p.m., everyone would start clanging pans and clapping for the essential workers. And it just felt so, to be honest, it felt so fake to me that essentially all these people who, to be honest, were well-to-do or whatever, and were not as worried about money, were binge-watching Netflix all day long and playing video games all day long, and then at 7 p.m. they take a 3-second break to clap for delivery workers, and then these people doing the clapping felt good about themselves, like, oh, I did my part. There are more ways to do your part than clapping for these essential workers. And, so I'm going to talk about a couple of things, and then I'm going to start answering questions. If you have any questions for me, please text me, 203-590-8607. Text me, and I'll try to get to as many questions as possible. I want to talk about persuasion a little bit, because one thing that's going to be important in... hey there, everybody. One thing that's going to be important in this new reset is not what degree you have. No one's going to care if you have a degree from Harvard, if you have a degree from MIT. Guess what? MIT just announced that they're doing 100% remote for the entire academic year. So you tell me, do I really care if someone learned how to program a computer from MIT, where they spend $70,000 a year, or from Code Academy, where an online school where they spent $1,000 a year? I much would prefer someone who learned from Code Academy. You know why? Because in a university, they're teaching academic computer science, academic programming. You're going to learn how to program in whatever academic languages they're using. But, real programmers who are making a living programming are doing it in the latest languages, and that's what you're only going to learn online. So I'd rather hire someone who learns from Code Academy or Khan Academy or whatever than someone who spends 4 years stupidly spending $70,000 a year learning essentially in the same method at MIT. So that's kind of bullshit that MIT thinks they can get away with it. But look, they can get away with it, unfortunately, because kids think that the only way they get jobs are from accredited higher universities. The reality is, just remember this no matter what. Skills are more important than degrees. Skills are more important than degrees. So there are two types of skills: soft skills, hard skills. Hard skills are programming, or like at the top is, programmers are going to be necessary. So if you know about AI, cybersecurity, programming, whatever, networking, you're going to do well. Trust me, you're going to do well. Now, some people listening to this might say, well, I can't be a programmer. Fine. You know what? I'm a programmer. I went to school for computer science. I was a programmer for 20 solid years. I started programming in 1987, and the last program I wrote was actually about 8 months ago. So I'm a programmer, but there's lots of things. There's lots of hard skills, even on the computer and in the technical world, I don't know. Like, for instance, the other day, I had never set up a Shopify store. Supposedly Shopify is the easiest way to set up an e-commerce store. So I figured, okay, let's see how easy it is. I'm going to try to set it up within an hour. So I set up the front page of the store, and then I started uploading products. I went to Shopify.com. They use Wix, which is a website builder. And guess what? It didn't work. I couldn't do it. I couldn't figure it out. And I'm a computer science major, and I went to graduate school for computer science. So if you could set up just a business where you help people set up their Shopify stores, you could charge for that. So let's say you live in a small town or a second tier city. Let's say you live in Kansas City. Let's say you have some expertise in not only setting up a Shopify store, but how to market a Shopify store. And you go around to every local business that's worried about a lockdown and you say, hey, before the next lockdown, how about I set up your store, your e-commerce store on Shopify, and I'll help you market it. Boom, I guarantee you, you're gonna be in business. So how much should you charge? I don't know. Charge $1,000 for initial setup, charge $50 for every product that's uploaded, and then charge maintenance of $300 a month to move products in and out, and then charge, now you're in with the customer, charge for marketing. So marketing is both a hard skill and a soft skill. So understanding how to sell is a soft skill, but understanding the technical details of search engine optimization or Instagram posts, or should you use Pinterest versus podcasts, or setting up an online newsletter or an online course to help sell, or doing, what we talked about yesterday, live commerce streams on TikTok or Instagram or whatever. Those are hard skills. So selling is a combination of soft skills and hard skills. So remember, skills are going to be much more important than degrees for the next 0 to 5 years, starting this month. So what soft skills should you learn? Well, I just said, learn how to set up a Shopify store. Learn how to do social media marketing on Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, TikTok. Learn how to set up an online newsletter. Learn how to do content management. If somebody's moving their clothing store online, they should set up a blog and maybe a newsletter, and then maybe write articles for LinkedIn or other websites. And then of course there's copywriting, and I want to set up a mini copywriting course, but I'll just tell you the basics right now. For every piece of copywriting, there's a problem, there's agitation, and there's a solution. So for instance, here's a problem. If I'm a dentist, how am I going to get new customers during a lockdown? Well, I don't want to go broke. If I'm a dentist, I don't want to go broke because I don't know how to advertise online. So that's agitation. So you pitch the dentist and you say, listen, I know how to market locally. We'll do Facebook ads targeting local people in the demographic that you serve. Maybe you serve people ages 55 to 65 who haven't been to the dentist recently, or maybe you target keywords like dental pain or tooth pain or toothache, and boom. Or maybe you target like toothache in Princeton, New Jersey. That's the keyword, and you buy that keyword for cheap on Google, and now there's a landing page where there's some copywriting like, oh, I'm the dentist who has no pain. Here's some testimonials. Here's a famous person who used me. Here's other social proof, blah, blah, blah. So you learn all the copywriting techniques. You set up a landing page, and boom. Now you did a whole social media project for one dentist. You charged $500. Now you have dental marketing as a service, DMAAS. So dental marketing as a service. Any dentist now can sign up for your dental social media agency, and you could charge for anybody in the country who needs your services. So those are, again, soft skills combined with basic hard skills. So let me talk a little bit about persuasion, and then I'll start answering some questions. So in my next book, it's coming out March 23rd, 2021. So I'm not selling it. It's coming out like 8 months from now. But what is that? It's like 8 months from now. But I have a big section I have several sections about persuasion. So I just want to give 2 quick persuasion techniques. One technique is called qualification. So, I'll talk about qualification first. So if you make someone qualify themselves for you, then their brain is gonna subconsciously think, oh, this person has status, that's why I had to qualify myself. So a very basic way to make somebody qualify themselves for you is you ask them, hey, what are your qualifications for you to be telling me this? Like if someone, if someone comes up to you and says, hey, or let's say you're trying to let's say you're trying to make a sale to a dentist. You create a social media agency and you want to convince a dentist to hire you. Instead of going to the dentist's office and saying to the dentist, hey, I know how to do Instagram posts and I know about copywriting, blah, blah, blah. Don't do that. Let's say the dentist says, hey, tell me your qualifications. You back off and say, hey, let's just take a step back. Why don't you tell me why you're the best dentist in town? So boom, you've switched the frame, and now he or she has to qualify himself for you. Once he qualifies himself for you, he is much more likely to say yes to being your customer. So the qualification, making someone qualify themselves for you, is a key persuasion technique. I've talked before in the past about the advice technique. I have an entire chapter about that in my next book. But qualification, I have an entire section about frame control in this book. The qualification is method number one, making someone else qualify them. It's sort of like the old technique of, who the hell do you think you are? You make them qualify themselves, or even in an argument. Like if someone says, well, I think Trump's going to be elected, or I think Biden's going to be elected. And you could just simply say, well, what qualifications do you have that I should listen to you? And boom, once they answer that question, then suddenly their brain, it's a cognitive bias, their brain is going to make them think that they have lower status than you. Here's another persuasion technique that works. You ever say to somebody, or you ever have someone say to you, hey, James, why are you so mad all of a sudden? What if I wasn't mad? But suddenly, I'm going to get mad when someone asks me, why am I so mad? So this is called shaping. The first technique I talked about was called qualifying. This technique is called shaping. So people will tend to take on the feature you suggest to them. So if I'm trying to, if I'm trying to get my boss to give me a raise, let's say I walk into his office or her office. Let's say I walk into their office and, I see some pictures and maybe there's a photo of, of the boss with his child at a Little League match. And you say, oh, it's a great picture. Where's that taken from? The boss says, I go to all my kids' Little League games and this was the championships. And you say to him something like, man, that's so generous of you to spend so much time and going with your kid to the Little League games. Well, now you just shaped them. You just told them that they are generous. So whether they're generous or not, they might be the stingiest, least generous person on the planet. But now you immediately switch to, by the way, it's time to talk about my raise and promotion. I think it's a reasonable point to talk about that. And then you're just silent because you've just shaped the boss into thinking that he or she is generous, whether they are or not. They're not going to they're going to have a cognitive bias to not disappoint you from this attribute you've just given them. And so they're going to be generous. Trust me, I have used these techniques. It's like hypnosis. They are incredibly powerful. So we talked about 2 techniques, and I'll talk about more in a future podcast / IG live. So again, qualification, make someone qualify themselves for you. So again, you're trying to sell, you created a social media agency, you're trying to sell a local clothing store that you should set up their Shopify and their Instagram accounts and their Pinterest accounts. You walk in there and they say, they try to make you qualify. They try to say, who are you? Why should I trust you to build my Shopify store? You say, hey, cool, I'll answer that, but let's just take a step back. I want you to tell me why you're the best clothing store on this street, or why you're the best clothing store in this town. I think this is the friendliest, most hospitable clothing store that I've seen in this town, i.e. you're doing shaping at that moment, and then you ask them, but tell me what makes you qualified to be, what makes you the best clothing store in town? What do you think makes you the best? So now they have to qualify for you. So using both persuasion techniques at once, I can tell you at that point, you have a customer for life. So these techniques are part of a system of techniques called frame control. And why is it called frame control? It's because, remember when you walk in that clothing store, the clothing store owner first tried to say to you, tell me why you're qualified to do my social media or my Shopify store or run my Instagram account. They're trying to seize the frame. They don't realize it, hopefully. They don't realize it. They're trying to seize the frame. Only one person can have the frame at a time. They're trying to seize the frame and make you qualify for them. And so that's why you have to take control of the frame. And so in the example I just gave, first you did shaping. You said, I just want to take a step back from that. And I just want to say, whenever I come into this store, I feel just like, oh, this is just the most comfortable, generous, hospitable store, friendly store, welcoming store I've walked into on this street. But I really want to hear it from you. Why do you think you're the best clothing store here? So again, now you have the frame, and if they start answering the question, you've dominated the frame. And I don't want to say you win, because it's not a battle like that. You also are going to do good services for them if you get the client, I'm assuming. But this is how you get the client. And remember, it's always important to remember, nobody really wants to hear how great you are. They want to tell you how great they are. Everybody just cares about their self-worth. So they'll start telling you, well, I'm the best clothing store because of X, Y, and Z. And you say, oh, that's great. I can really see how you're X, Y, and Z. So now they're qualifying themselves, and you keep control of the frame by feeding their anxiety about their own self-worth. This sounds so manipulative, but it isn't really, because your ultimate goal, you're not going to misuse frame control, because we're the choose yourself warriors. We're gonna have skills. We already said skills are greater than degrees. We're gonna have the skills to help the civilians in this. You're gonna help them, but you need to convince them that they need to be helped. They don't know yet what their PAS, problem, agitation, solution is. So first you have to seize control of the frame, shaping, qualifying, feeding their self-worth, and then you're able to sell them. And I can guarantee you it'll be trivial. Finally then, how do you keep the client? Because, by the way, your best new clients are your old clients. And this is not just about business, by the way. This is about any relationship you have. But I'm making it about business because who wants to go back to their shitty little cubicle job when all of this is done? Even if you're back at your job, you've got to be thinking of a plan B now, because we just saw 1 out of 3 Americans got laid off by their corporate jobs. So corporatism is dead. You need to choose yourself and find what, I don't even like the word side hustles anymore. You need to find your alternative sources of income, and potentially some of those sources of income could turn into full-fledged businesses. This is going to be an important skill. And again, one of those soft skills that you need to learn is you're not going to learn it at MIT, you're not going to learn it at Harvard, you're not going to learn it at USC or wherever. You're going to learn it through discussions like this, where you'll find experts in different areas, and you'll absorb what you can and what you want from them, and you'll learn those skills, whether it's a website like Coursera or Code Academy or a podcast like this. But frame control is one of those skills that are going to help you in selling. Copywriting is going to help you be an effective seller once you get the client. And then there are some kind of mild hard skills, like how do you set up a Shopify site? How do you set up a WordPress blog? How do you set up, how do you find what products are trending on Google? Like right now on Google, trending is inflatable pools, because for the reasons I said yesterday, because everybody's going to need an inflatable pool instead of going in the public pool this summer because of all the lockdowns. And then you're able to look up, Alibaba, I could buy an inflatable pool for $20, and the exact same pool is selling for $300 on Amazon. So anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about skills are going to be greater than degrees, and I wanted to give some, but not all, persuasion techniques. I find the study of persuasion to be fascinating, and I don't really think any books really effectively cover it right now. Like there's Influence by Robert Cialdini, but that's a little bit more academic, I feel. I feel like it's academic research. And look, he was the influence advisor for Hillary Clinton. So how good did he really do at it? Maybe, as Scott Adams pointed out, Hillary Clinton was probably going to win the 2016 election when her ads were focused on, and by the way, I'm not being political here. I'm just breaking down the persuasion methodologies of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. This is not political at all. But Hillary's ad campaigns in the middle of the summer were all about, do you really want this guy's hands on the nuclear button? She was rising in the polls during that time. She was probably going to win. Instead, she switched her message to, I'm with her. Because that was when Trump did the whole Billy Bush, I'll grab her by the whatever. So Hillary Clinton figured, okay, I'm going to latch onto that, and so to speak, and I'm going to change my message to I'm with her. Well, she just alienated half of her audience, whether she realized it or not, and she lost the election. Meanwhile, Trump, dusted off a Reagan persuasion technique, and Reagan was considered the great communicator. Whether he was a good president or not is hard to say, but I'm not going to comment. But the Make America Great Again came from Reagan's 1980 campaign. He just dusted that off. He knew it worked. He used it. He won. So understanding frame control and persuasion techniques and the subtleties of them are critical during what we'll call the Great Reset. The Great Reset starts July 1st, today, and is going to continue for the next 5 years. Skills greater than degrees, and the skills you need to know are hard skills ranging from, serious computer programming to simply setting up an Instagram page. And the soft skills are going to range from, persuasion techniques to, copywriting, storytelling, marketing, and so on. These are critical silos of skills that you need to know. So now welcome to the second half of this glorious year, 2020. A year, obviously, here's what I think should happen, by the way. I think someone should call up whoever is running this gigantic, shitty simulation that we're living in. Here's the advice I would give that person. Walk over to the computer that's labeled 2020, unplug it, count to 15, plug it back in. Because it's not working. We need a reboot. But that said, me and the people listening to this, we're going to have that reset. We're going to be able to not hide under our covers, but make the best use of the situation at hand. So now I'm going to get to some questions, and hopefully I can answer them. Okay, great question here. Do you have some creative suggestions for how to do a cold outreach to an individual? Both how to find contact info, and successful strategies for garnering a response. So, great question. So I'll tell you a story. In 2003, or 2004, I wanted to reach out and get in touch with maybe one of the best investors in history, Stevie Cohen. He was a hedge fund manager. He ran $12 billion of hedge funds. I was running a hedge fund too, but to be honest, I just wanted to be an employee of his. I didn't even want to have him invest in me. I just wanted to and by the way, Stevie Cohen is probably the basis for Axe, from Axe Capital and Billions. So season 3, I was an advisor on Billions. And, Stevie Cohen was more or less the basis of the character Axe. But anyway, this is back in 2004. I didn't know how to get in touch with Stevie Cohen. I had no credibility or anything. So here's what I did. First off, I did a search on, Stevie Cohen's company was SAC.com. So I did a search on quotes, in quotes, at SAC.com. So I saw if anybody else sent emails around using that domain name, how did they format the name? So then I saw, it was like first name, last name's initial, blah, 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 whatever the format was. And then I tried every combination I could think of, and one out of maybe 10 emails I sent, 9 out of 10 emails bounced, one didn't. I sent an email, he didn't respond. I sent another one, he didn't respond. I sent another one, he didn't respond. Finally, I detailed in specific detail, here are the 10 ways I can help you make money. And, Craig Stalin, SEC was a client of yours. So you'll know what I'm talking about. So finally, I detailed, using my 10 ideas a day method, I detailed 10 different ways I can make SAC money and my approach. And finally, I got an email back. It was amazing. And it just said, tell me your AOL instant messaging. That was back in AOL IM days. And we started instant messaging, and he said, okay, this is great. Let's meet. And so we met, and first off, I went an hour and a half ride to his office. Craig, you probably visited the same office. I went to his office, and I remember sitting there waiting for him, and I was so jealous of everybody walking in and out of there. Everybody, it was like summer, but everyone was wearing like a fleece vest because for whatever reason, he kept the air conditioning really low, or kept the temperature really low at the firm, because I think that got people energized somehow. So everyone was wearing this SAC vest. And I was just so jealous of them. Like, I wanted to work there. It seemed like such a great place. And then I met him. He was super nice. And he was like, oh, finally I get to meet the great James Altucher. And he quoted articles back to me that I had written. So he had done, this multi-billionaire had done his research before I even got there. And we met, and this was at 4:00. I asked him just casually, oh, how did you do today in the markets? And he just said, oh, I had my worst day in a year. So I thought that was amazing. He's such a professional guy. He had his worst day in a year, didn't seem bothered at all, was professionally talking to me as if there was nothing going on, and he liked all my ideas. And it didn't work out in the end for various reasons. That's another story. But and then I remember we walked out of his office. It was the end of the day. And he just got in his car and drove home, like nothing fancy. And anyway, it was an interesting experience. But my point is to reach out, Steve Cohen, the other Steve Cohen, by the way, the former producer of my podcast, he has this good point. You got to reach out 16 times to get a response from someone. And so it doesn't mean 16 emails in a row saying, please come on my podcast, please come on my podcast, please meet me, please go for a coffee with me. It means just staying in touch. Like if you see someone famous, like let's say you want to get in touch with, I don't know, Jeff Bezos, and somehow you get a hold of his email. You say, oh, hey, great job you did with, bonusing all your employees, or great job you did putting your new offices in New York City, or whatever he's doing. Great job. You always point out good things that they did. You build up, again, their self-worth. Jeff Bezos is no different than you or me. He wants his self-worth built up. And so over the course of, or maybe on Twitter, you mention, oh, the 3 people I admire most, and then you tag them. Jeff Bezos, Richard Branson, Tyra Banks. And, gradually, 16 touches is what it takes. They see your name over time. It's always in ways that are gratifying to them. And 16 touches is usually what it takes if you're going to get in touch with them. After that, you might not be able to, but 16 should be enough. And my former producer on my podcast, it worked for him every single time. If I wanted to get someone on my podcast, he could just call the guy up usually, but 16 touches of all, you attack them from every angle. You don't just ask them to go on the podcast. You email them congratulations. You email them happy birthday. You email their managers or wives or whatever. You do favors for them. 16 touches, and then they'll come on the podcast, or they'll meet you to be a customer or whatever. So that's roughly 2 different approaches. Sending and sharing ideas, and then this 16 touches approach. For me, always the most effective thing, sharing of ideas. So let's go to the next question. In this, someone asked, can I get information about your wrapping device? So it's not my wrapping device, but in 2016, I had just started. I gave up. I threw out all my possessions, and I had just started living from Airbnb to Airbnb. And I didn't rent any apartments. I didn't own any place. I only had a carry-on bag. And for a while, I moved in with my friend Scott, and Scott and I would have these all night discussions. Like I think this was right after the Eric Garner police shooting, and there were all these protests and riots. I miss Robin too, Shelly, but she's picking up our kids. So, 2016, I'm living with my friend Scott, and we're having these discussions about how to stop police brutality. And so we essentially came up with the idea of creating a device that wraps around, it was the 10 ideas. At first we were thinking maybe a sonic device where you send like a sonic boom at someone and it knocks them out. But then we figured this, a device that shoots out a Kevlar cable, wraps around them and restrains them. It's like mobile handcuffs. Started the company. I'm no longer involved at all, but I'm an initial shareholder. This company went public. Stock symbol's WRTC. Not officially recommending it, but I'm just mentioning what the symbol is. Wrap Technologies, and it works. It's so like out of all the things I've done, it really is gratifying to be involved in something where every day we get phone calls. You just saved another life today. So that's what I always wanted to be involved in. Again, I'm not involved at all with the company right now, but I love that I was a participant from the beginning. Another question. Let's see. This is from Max, different Max. Still in debt for student loans. His question is, my father constantly blames me because he spent a fortune on my education and now I'm unemployed. How do I explain to him that college is a scam? Let me tell you something. You can't explain to him. You cannot convince anybody of your opinion. The more you try to convince somebody of something, there's something called the backlash cognitive bias. So if I try to convince you, oh my gosh, you shouldn't vote for ABC, you should vote for XYZ. You're going to feel a cognitive bias called the backlash effect. You're going to actually defend even more than you would have why you're going to vote for XYZ. So you can't convince anyone of anything. Don't try to control people. Ask them questions. So here's what you can do. Don't explain to your dad that college is a scam. Ask questions instead. So what questions can you ask? You can ask, Dad, why does Google and Ernst & Young, the biggest accounting firm, why do they no longer require college degrees to get a top job there? Why do you think that is? Or, Dad, why do you think all these people are taking online courses for $1,000 a year instead of $70,000 a year? Like, what's happening? What do you think's going on? Dad, why has college tuitions risen faster than inflation every single year for 30 years? Has the education improved that much? Like when you were a kid 30 years ago, was college much worse than it is now? It seems like now it's even harder to get a job. So just ask questions. One of my daughters, when she was 15 years old, I would tell her, Josie, you are not going to college. And here's why. And I would list the reasons. You know what she would do? She would just turn around and walk away from me. Like, she wouldn't even respond. She was 15 years old, piece of little whatever. And I remember one time talking to her and we were in a mall and she just turned around and walked away rather than respond to me. So I took a step back, and rather than trying to convince her, I would ask her questions. Like, Josie, will it really improve your acting skill if you go to college, or is it better to simply act in local theater productions? Josie, do you really need to spend $250,000 to be an actress, or should you get paid to act and try it out for commercials and see if you like the lifestyle in New York City? So I would ask questions instead. The second you try to convince somebody, first off, let's just take a step back. What is convincing? If I try to convince you, listen guys, I need to convince you that I'm right. This is a frame control thing. I just gave you the frame. By trying to convince you, I gave you status. Why should I let my 15-year-old daughter have status over me on such a high stakes decision like going to college or not? So once you try to convince someone, you've given them the frame. You've given them status. They're worthy for you to be convincing them of something. Instead, ask questions. So now you're qualifying them. Again, it all boils down to, I'm saying to Josie instead, what makes you qualified to give an answer about college? Tell me, I'm curious. What makes you qualified? What will eventually make you qualified to be a good actress? Tell me. And then they start thinking. And guess what? She went to college. She went freshman year and sophomore year. And then last year, she dropped out. And she moved to New York City and she started acting. And she started acting in lots of different things. So I don't want to say my technique worked because it's not so technique driven. I cared about her life choices, but I needed to effectively communicate that. And trying to make a logical argument, we know does not work. People, civilians cannot be convinced by logic. So as a choose yourselfer, you have to learn the techniques outside of logic that actually affect the brain and convince people. And again, it's not like you're trying to manipulate them. Don't use this for the wrong purpose. With great power comes great responsibility. But I cared about my daughter and I wanted her to make good life choices. And so I used these techniques and they worked. And I could have said to her, you know what? I'm refusing to let you go to college. Go to college. I'm refusing. But how is that going to improve my relationship with her? Like when she really needs me in life, when she's 25 or 26 years old, I want her to come to me. I don't want her to run away from me because I tried to force her into my way of thinking. So now I planted the seeds. A year and a half ago, or 2 years ago, whatever it was, she quit college and now she's doing fine. And you know what? Now she's working on her side hustles and she got paid on some side hustle a couple weeks ago. So I'm proud of her. I'm not proud that she's actually applying for a contact tracing job, but other than that, because I do think contact tracing is going to lead to 1984. But let's see. Another question. How many restaurants are closed? Where's the data? Well, I'll tell you two pieces of data. One is anecdotal. When I walk around New York City right now, some restaurants are closed until further notice, and some restaurants are for rent. And it was about 20% of the restaurants I passed that were for rent. And so I thought to myself, well, if they're out of business now, how many will be out of business once this whole thing is over? How many are actually secretly out of business right now? And Yelp, I figured it was about double, and I've mentioned that on these lives. Yelp just announced their own data. Yelp said about 41% of the restaurants on Yelp are now officially out of business. So that's horrible that so many restaurants are out of business. But again, everything, do you know the Isaac Newton's second law of thermodynamics? So energy is conserved. So when something loses energy, like the traditional restaurant energy, that energy has to go somewhere, right? People still have to eat. So there's opportunity. What's the opportunity? How could there be opportunity if all these restaurants are closed? Well, I'll tell you, like somebody told me the other day, very interesting. This guy said, he said, I would love eventually to open a restaurant. And I'm like, well, what qualifies you to open a restaurant? And he said, well, there's these rib bake-offs that I win every year for making ribs. And I'm like, well, okay, here's an idea. When you think of a restaurant, what do you think of? And he said, well, I gotta find a location, it's all regulated, I gotta find a hostess and waiters and cooks and sub-cooks and bartenders, and I gotta manage the employees. It's such a drag, it's too much. And I'm like, well, what about doing, and I've talked about this before here, what about doing what's called a cloud kitchen? You find, and you're like, what's that? You find, sometimes it's called a commissary kitchen. You find a regulated kitchen where you're allowed to make food that you can sell. You rent a small, tiny piece of it. So instead of spending $15,000 a month on a restaurant space, you spend $500 a month renting a small part of a cloud kitchen. And you come up with a menu. This is, Jimmy's Ribs. and you have all sorts of different kinds of ribs, and you upload that menu to Uber Eats, to DoorDash, to Grubhub, to Caviar, to Seamless. Guess what? Now you have a restaurant. Almost all the restaurants I've ordered delivery from, I've never visited in person, but they might not exist for all I know. It might be just some legal guy renting a space in a legal kitchen. But I consider them, right now, a restaurant is not a physical location. A restaurant is a menu. So, again, the fact that 40% of restaurants might now be out of business means there's opportunity. People still need to eat. Go rent, if you love the restaurant business and you like cooking, go to a cloud kitchen for $500 a month, make 10 menus. You can create 10 restaurants simultaneously. I'm gonna make Jimmy's Ribs. So a good idea is to take one popular product and come up with like 20 different flavors for it, and that's a restaurant, Jimmy's Ribs. The other thing you can do is take a traditional product and make it outlandishly big or small. So I can do, Big Al's big ice cream cones. So if you order from, the menu is just huge ice cream cones. So 10 times the size of a regular ice cream cones. Order from Big Al's ice cream cones, featured on local TV. We make the biggest ice cream cones in the county. And, upload 10 menus, and then over a week, you see which menus are popular, shut down the restaurants that are not popular, double down on the restaurants that are popular, and now you're in the restaurant business. So again, the important point there is not how to create a cloud restaurant. The important point is that, yes, it's bad news that 40% of restaurants are probably out of business right now. But the good news is that wherever there's a decline in energy, there's a rise in some other energy. Energy is conserved. It moves around, and we don't always understand where it's moving to, but I promise you it's moved somewhere. There's always opportunity. When energy is lost from some commercial area of life, there's always an opportunity somewhere else. So it's an important rule to remember, particularly in this period, which I'm calling the Great Reset. Is finance an industry in decline? It's another question. No, finance is not an industry in decline. You know why? Because finance is just the business of how to transfer one asset into another asset in as clever a way as possible. So let's say I own a laundromat and I want to sell it. Well, I need to, for the finance, I go to the finance industry, I go to a banker, and I say to the banker, I want to sell my laundromat. And the banker then finds buyers. I sell my laundromat, and now I've converted this asset into dollars. So finance is just the industry of converting one asset to another. So finance is never in decline, because right now there are so many businesses that are struggling. They need to figure out how to change some of their problems, some of their assets into financial opportunity. So there's maybe opportunities to buy things cheaply. Maybe there's opportunities to liquidate some of their, like let's say a laundromat's going out of business. Well, they've got all these washing machines they need to liquidate now and try to get money on them. You could be a liquidator and put washing machines on eBay, Etsy, Alibaba, wherever, Amazon, and they don't know how to do it. They're in the laundromat business, but you're in the finance business, so you know how to do it. Or maybe they want to sell, or maybe you want to buy, or maybe they need a loan. And so you can say, I'll loan you money, but it's not going to be cheap. It's going to be 20% a year. And if you miss one single payment, I'm going to take over the whole laundromat, and I need to take over your house also. Boom. That's the finance business. Sometimes it's ugly, sometimes it's nice, but there are always opportunities. You don't need to have, by the way, I worked in the finance industry. I don't have an MBA. I have never worked for a bank. I just wanted to trade and invest, and I successfully did it. Everyone kept telling me, oh, you need an MBA, or maybe you should work for a bank first before you do this. And I'm like, oh, and at the time, I was like dead broke when someone told me that, and I still wanted to do it. And he made me feel so bad, like, I don't think anybody's going to hire you. You're kind of a loser. And, screw that guy. I started writing down my 10 ideas a day of how I could get into the finance business, and it worked. I have, I was a hedge fund manager, I was a day trader, I was a venture capitalist, I've bought and sold businesses. And by the way, I've gone broke 3 or 4 times since then. But when you have some skills with money, you're able to, I'm not saying it was easy, by the way, but you're able to bounce back. Some people say, oh, failure, I failed, so now I can bounce back. That's BS. Failure, I call that failure porn. There is nothing good about failing. Best case, you learn something, but if you just went broke and you have to support a bunch of kids and a house and all this, it is not fun. It is depressing. It is the worst thing in the world. I felt so bad, but you get through it and you hopefully learn and whatever, life moves on. Let's see. Some of these questions I will answer directly through text, and others I will answer here. Thank you, Lane, for sending me that video about, yesterday I talked about live commerce. So it's the idea that the business model of QVC, which is a TV station where you can watch people hawking, selling products, that business model is moving to all live streaming. Like I could do a live Instagram and I could say, oh, I've got 27 Rolex watches. If you call in the next 5 minutes, I'll sell you for $200 each. So it sounds cheesy, but QVC makes $11 billion a year by doing it. But guess what? China, live streaming commerce, makes $169 billion in revenues last year. And that trend is moving all around the world now. So it's good. And Lane, you just sent me a video of it happening. The inventive way to cook chicken. And thank you for sending me that. So it's happening. That's it. I don't know. Someone asked a question here, and I'll answer. What's the best payment method? Use Stripe. Set up Stripe or Venmo or Google Pay. When you set up any kind of store, make it as easy as, you want no friction when people buy. So I love it when I can pay through, I'm on some random store online and I can pay through Google Pay, or I can pay through Facebook, or I can pay through Venmo, or I can pay through Amazon, or I can pay through Stripe using my credit card, or PayPal using my credit card. So give all the options. For whenever you're selling something, you want zero friction. You always want to get people in the door because, again, your first sale, not such a big deal. But your best new customers are your old customers, because you could always resell someone who already trusts you. Someone says, you ask, should I change job now? No. As long as you have a job, keep your job. But critical, don't forget this, you must start listing 10 ideas a day. You need to exercise the creativity muscle. I can't repeat that enough, because then you'll start coming up with ideas for more and more business opportunities and side hustles. Like I was just thinking of an idea. Oh, here's an idea. I'm wearing pajamas right now. I want to find a manufacturer of pajamas, but it's really hard to find a manufacturer of anything, particularly in America. So I wish there was a business I can call and I said, this is what I want to do. And they call me back a day later and say, I found 3 manufacturers who will make copper infused pajamas for you with any design you want. And here's their pricing. Who do you want to use? Do you want to make an order? So, and they'll take 10% of every order or whatever, or maybe they charge me a flat fee. I wish there was a manufacturer consulting business. So that's like kind of a business idea of the day. Particularly now, everybody is thinking about starting clothing lines. I just read an article the other day how clothing, new fashion line businesses are kind of a big trend right now. But I always scroll through those articles. How do they get the clothes made? How do they get their designs made? And it's always like, oh, here's a t-shirt with my logo on it. That's not real fashion line. That's just a t-shirt with your logo on it. I want to have I want to change the structure and the design of pajamas. How do you manufacture that? Oh, there's a firm in Israel that makes copper. Oh, and then there's China, which they might be shut down too. They're going to have a new flu pandemic or whatever. Now I got to introduce these. I don't know how to do it. I'm not a manufacturer. Manufacturer consulting business, I would pay for that. By the way, I'd also pay for someone to help me with Shopify stores. Any other question here? Oh, I was going to answer someone's book question. There's 16 seconds left. Someone wanted to have a book challenge that didn't involve research. Shit, I had an idea for that. Stay tuned tomorrow. There's 8 seconds left. Thank you so much. I will save this on my IG feed and YouTube. Bye.